Something happened this week that you did not expect. Not a big event, not a conversation with him, not a sign from the universe that you could hold up and say, "Here, this is proof." Something smaller than that. Something that happened inside you in the middle of something ordinary. Something you have done dozens of times before in the name of healing. You were doing the work, the journaling, the meditation, the breathwork, the affirmations, the walk outside that you took because someone told you nature recalibrates the nervous system, and you believed them because you were willing to believe anything that promised it would help. You were going through the motions of the version of you that is healing, the version that knows exactly which stage she is in, the version that can explain the twin flame journey to someone new with genuine eloquence. And then something stopped you, not from outside, from inside. A sensation, not a thought, not an insight you could write down and post and nod at in the morning. Something physical, something that moved through you without asking permission. And for a second, just 1 second, you felt something you had not felt in a long time. Something that was not the healing project. Something that was not the performance of being the woman who is doing her work and trusting the process and holding her vibration. Something that was just you, real, unmanaged, alive in a way that all the correct spiritual practice had not quite reached. That moment matters more than everything you did in the last month combined. If you have felt the difference this week between going through healing motions and actually feeling something land, leave a like and subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. Drop "I feel the real thing" in the comments. Because that gap, the gap between performed healing and felt healing, is exactly what the script is going to walk you through. Right now, before we go any further, I have to put something directly in your hands. Because if you are at the place this script is describing, you are not just in a healing process. You are at a threshold. You have crossed the line from needing the general explanation into needing something more personal than any general content can reach. A threshold like this one deserves a specific map, not a general one. A twin flame union personal reading was built for exactly this crossing. This is not a forecast for your sun sign. This is a reading that goes into the precise architecture of your unique connection, built from your birth chart as the foundation. Your name, your date of birth, your exact time of birth, your place of birth. From those 4 coordinates, what lands in your inbox is a personal audio reading and a detailed written report. What the universe is currently orchestrating in the space between you. Where you actually are in your journey right now. What karmic patterns have been running beneath the surface. What your soul contract with him truly says about where this is heading. This does not leave you with beautiful, vague language. It leaves you with a map you can actually use again and again. The link is below. If something and you just said yes, follow that. Now back to what is actually moving inside you. You did not set out to perform healing. Nobody does. It crept in the way most survival mechanisms creep in. Gradually, through repetition, through the slow accumulation of moments where you needed to feel like you were doing something, moving in the right direction, not just sitting inside the pain with nowhere to put it. The twin flame journey has a particular kind of cruelty in that regard. It asks you to hold an enormous amount of feeling with no clear end date and no consistent external proof that any of the holding is doing anything at all. And so the mind does what minds do when they are overwhelmed by something they cannot fix. They find a structure. They turn the process into a project. The healing project. You know what it looks like from the inside. It is the morning routine you follow precisely because the structure of it makes you feel less like you are falling apart. It is the way you can frame your pain in the language of the journey, because the language of the journey makes the pain feel meaningful rather than random and purposeless. It is the journaling that functions more as documentation than genuine contact with what you are actually feeling. It is the spiritual community, the content you consume, the frameworks you have learned, the stages you can name, the explanations you can give when someone asks what you are going through. None of that is wrong. None of it. The structure kept you functional during seasons when functional was genuinely the achievement. But somewhere along the way, a subtle shift happened. The healing process started running above the feeling rather than through it. And this is the moment healing becomes performance, not because you are being dishonest, not because you lack commitment to the work, but because the structure that was designed to help you process the feeling became so practiced, so familiar, so automatic that it started to function as a layer between you and the feeling itself. The journaling stopped being a way to make contact with what was alive in you. It became a way to translate it into language that could be examined from a safe enough distance. The breathwork stopped being a way to feel your body. It became a technique you applied correctly. The gratitude practice stopped being genuine contact with the present moment. It became a form of mood management. You were doing everything right and touching almost nothing real. The performing version of you is high vibration. She is composed. She is spiritually articulate. She knows all the right things about releasing attachment and divine timing and trusting the process. She can hold space for other people in the middle of her own pain and still sound wise. She is impressive, actually. She has had to be. But she is also exhausted in a very specific way. The kind of exhausted that sleep does not fix. The kind that comes not from doing too much, but from being slightly out of contact with yourself for too long. Like being at a party and smiling and engaging and saying all the right things and coming home to an apartment that feels very quiet in a way that makes it hard to know what you actually feel now that the performance is over. That specific tiredness is the body telling you something. It is telling you that the felt sense wants in. Here's what's somatic work. Specifically, the framework developed by Peter Levine through decades of work with people in various states of freeze and overwhelm, consistently finds in people who are doing all the right things on the surface and still feel like something essential is not moving. The body holds what the mind has not yet allowed. Levine's foundational insight is that the nervous system carries incomplete experiences, things that started to move through the system and got interrupted, sensations that began to rise and were redirected before they could complete their natural arc, emotions that were translated immediately into thought, into language, into narrative, before they were allowed to simply be experienced in the body first. In the context of a twin flame separation, this happens constantly, and it happens below the level of conscious awareness. Something moves in your chest. Your throat tight for 3 days now. Your stomach drops in a specific way. And before any of that sensation has been allowed to simply exist, the mind is already on it, already reaching for the explanation, already finding the framework, already placing it in the correct stage of the journey and assigning it the appropriate meaning. The sensation never got to finish. What Levine built on, and what philosopher and therapist Eugene Gendlin called the felt sense, is the body's own knowing, not the mind's interpretation of the body. The body's direct, unmediated experience of itself, the experience that exists before language arrives, which is always richer, always more specific, always more alive than any translation of it into words will fully capture. The felt sense is what you are in contact with when you suddenly stop in the middle of something and something moves through you that you did not engineer. It arrives from below the level of the narrative. It does not ask for your permission or your understanding before it comes. That is what happened this week. Something moved in you before the performance had a chance to intercept it. And what you felt in that moment, that aliveness, that rawness, that sensation of something actually landing rather than being managed, is not regression. It is not evidence that your healing is not working. It is the real thing arriving through a gap in the performance. It is your nervous system completing something that has been waiting to complete for longer than you realize. The body completes at its own pace, always. And when it finally gets the opening it has been waiting for, it does not announce itself. It does not say, ready when you are, it just moves. And either you follow it into the felt sense or the mind arrives half a second later and translates it back into something that can be documented. This week, for 1 second, you followed it. That second is not nothing. That second is actually the whole journey. Here is what is important to understand from a somatic perspective about why that single unguarded moment carries more weight than weeks of correct practice. In nervous system terms, regulation is not about doing the correct thing. It is about the system being allowed to complete its own process. When you do breath work, you are creating conditions. You are inviting the completion. But the completion itself is not something you do. It is something you allow. And allowing requires the management layer to release, even briefly, enough for the body to do what it has been waiting to do. Most of the time, the management layer is too fast, too well trained. It intercepts the sensation before the completion can happen. This is not a failure. It is what a protective system that is doing its job correctly looks like. It is keeping you from the kind of overwhelm that was genuinely dangerous at earlier points in this journey. But the protection has a cost. The cost is that the completion keeps getting deferred, and the deferred completions accumulate, not as trauma necessarily, as a particular kind of thickness, a sense of being slightly padded from your own experience. Present, yes. Functioning, yes. Healing in the documented sense, yes. But not fully in contact with the full temperature of what you are actually living. That thickness lifted for one moment this week, and what moved through you in that moment was what had been waiting on the other side of the performance. There is something else that Genlin's research reveals about this particular kind of moment, about what it means when the felt sense breaks through the practiced layer. He observed across thousands of hours of working with people in therapy that the moments of genuine felt sense contact were always accompanied by a specific quality he called the felt shift. Not a cognitive shift, not an insight, a change in the bodily quality of the experience itself. Before the felt sense arrived, there was a certain texture to what the person was carrying, a density, a particular weight, and then the felt sense completed something and the texture changed. Not dramatically. Not dramatically at all, actually, but unmistakably. Like a knot in the shoulders releasing half a degree. Like the breath dropping a half-inch lower in the chest than it had been managing to reach. Like their particular tightness that has been living in the jaw for so long you stopped noticing it suddenly and quietly. Not being quite as there. This is the felt shift, and you felt it this week. Maybe you did not have language for it. Maybe you dismissed it almost immediately as it was happening. Maybe the mind arrived 10 seconds later and started translating it into content, and you lost the thread of what the body had actually just done. But before any of that, there was a moment where the texture changed. That is what the felt shift is. Not a feeling that arrives and departs without leaving anything behind. A change in the state of the system itself. Subtle, unannounced. Not dramatic enough to point at and say, here, this is where everything changed. But it is exactly where everything changed. Gendelin found that these felt shifts were more predictive of actual therapeutic progress than any amount of verbal insight or intellectual processing. Not because feelings are more valid than thoughts, but because the felt shift indicates that the body has completed something, that the incomplete experience has moved through its arc, that the nervous system has done what it came to do and landed in a different place than where it started. She is in a different place than where she started, even if nothing on the outside looks different yet, even if he has not reached out, even if the circumstances have not changed, even if the journey looks, from the outside, exactly as it looked last week. Something completed in her body this week. And completion, in somatic terms, is not the end. It is the beginning of the next thing that wants to move. The moon moved into Cancer today, and a Cancer moon with Venus forming a parallel to Uranus right now, moving toward an exact conjunction in 2 days, is doing something specific in the collective emotional field, something that is particularly relevant to what a divine feminine in mid-separation is experiencing in her body. Cancer is the sign of the felt sense in its most elemental form, not the processed emotional landscape, not the understood feeling, not the feeling that has been held at the correct spiritual temperature and integrated through the appropriate practices. Cancer is the feeling before the understanding, the body before the mind arrives, the wave before the name. Venus parallel, Uranus, building toward conjunction, carries the specific energetic signature of the unexpected opening, the sudden arrival of something genuine through the crust of what has been habitual. Uranus breaks patterns. Uranus ruptures the rehearsed. Uranus creates the gap in the practiced layer through which the real thing gets in. Venus in this configuration is not the soft, comfortable, romantic Venus of slow development. Venus here is the aliveness that arrives when the usual arrangement is disrupted. Together with the moon in Cancer as the container, what this produces in the field today is precisely the conditions for the felt sense to break through. For the body to complete something the mind has been keeping neatly contained. For the real thing to arrive not as a spiritual download or a meaningful insight, but as a physical sensation that moves through you before you can interpret it. This is the astrological signature underneath what you experienced this week. The field created the gap. Your body walked through it. And what you touched on the other side of the gap is not a stage on the healing journey. It is not progress in the documented sense. It is more fundamental than that. It is contact with yourself. Simple, unperformed, direct contact with the fact of being alive in a body that has been carrying this much for this long. And that is, beneath all the structured practice and the spiritual framework and the correct stage identification, still a body, still animal, still governed by sensations that do not wait for the mind's approval before they move. The universe is not asking you to be more healed. It is asking you to be more present. And today, the field cooperated. He does not know what is happening, but he feels something. This is how the twin flame energetic connection actually functions, and it is worth understanding precisely because the performance version of healing does not produce the same effect on his system that the felt sense version does. When she is in the performance, his nervous system registers a certain quality in her field. High vibration, organized, spiritually composed, but not particularly warm, not particularly present. The performance is consistent, but it is not alive in the same way that genuine contact with the felt sense is alive. And his system, calibrated to hers at a level that precedes conscious thought, feels the difference. He does not have language for the difference. He does not even necessarily know he is registering it. But at the somatic level, he is. When something breaks through the performance and she makes real contact with what is happening in her body, the quality of her field changes. What has been emitting the signal of a woman managing her process starts to emit the signal of a woman who is genuinely present with herself. These are not the same signal. From a somatic perspective, this is what researchers call nervous system attunement operating across distance. The nervous system of the divine feminine and the nervous system of the divine masculine in a genuine twin flame connection are not operating as entirely separate systems. They are calibrated to each other in a way that develops through the depth of soul recognition and that does not simply switch off when physical proximity ends. What somatic practitioners observe in the most deeply bonded relational systems, and what the twin flame connection demonstrates with particular intensity, is that the regulation of one system genuinely influences the other even when the two people are not in the same room, even when they have not spoken in weeks, even when everything on the surface looks like permanent separation. So when she drops the performance and makes genuine contact with the felt sense, he feels it without being able to account for it. A pull in his chest without obvious cause. A memory of her surfacing at an unrelated moment. A restlessness that has no clear origin in anything happening in his external life. An awareness of absence that is heavier today than it has been in recent days. He might dismiss it. Most likely he does dismiss it or tries to. The way he has been dismissing everything that arrives from the direction of this connection for a long time now. But it arrives. It always arrives. There is something else worth understanding about what he is carrying right now. In this week, in this specific configuration of the field, he is not just feeling her presence. He is feeling the absence of the thing he has gotten used to feeling from her. And the absence of the familiar is its own kind of signal. When she was in the performance, his system calibrated to it, not consciously. Systems do not calibrate consciously. But the steady, consistent, organized quality of her managed field became something his nervous system oriented around, the way any system orients around a predictable signal. He could predict it. He could remain in his own management strategies without much disturbance from her direction, because what was coming from her direction was also managed. When the performance broke and the felt sense arrived, what reached him was not just her warmth. What reached him was her unpredictability, her aliveness, the specific quality of a signal that does not stay neatly in its lane, that overflows its own container, that moves toward him with a warmth that has no agenda attached to it because it was not engineered for his consumption. It was just hers, just real. Just the direct transmission of a person making genuine contact with her own experience. A nervous system that has been calibrated to the managed signal does not know how to orient around the genuine one. It gets confused in the best possible way. His system does not know what to do with the aliveness of her. He cannot predict it the way he could predict the performance. He cannot keep it in the category he has assigned her to. He cannot maintain the comfortable distance he has maintained because the signal coming from her direction is doing something to his system that the managed signal never did. It is reaching him, not through a text, not through a conversation, through the field, through the specific frequency of genuine presence that moves in a way that managed presence does not. And he does not know what to do with that. He genuinely does not. So he sits with a restlessness that has no name, with a pull that has no clear object, with an awareness that something in the territory of her has changed in a way he cannot account for. This is not him being dramatic. This is not him suddenly becoming ready. He is not ready in the way she might hope for if she knew what was happening in his field. But something has shifted in his orientation. And orientation is always the beginning. And this is the thing she does not fully understand about the impact of genuine presence in herself on the connection. She imagines that the work of healing is primarily something she does for herself, which is correct. And she imagines that what affects the connection is the spiritual content of her work, the stage she has reached, the insights she has had, the vibration she is maintaining. And this is where the understanding is incomplete. What moves in his system is not the stage she has reached. What moves in his system is the quality of her presence with herself. A woman in genuine contact with her own felt sense. A woman who has, even for one unguarded moment, let the real thing arrive rather. Then managing it into something more comfortable sends a signal into the field that is warmer, more alive, more recognizable to the part of him that recognized her before any of the complications arrived. He turns toward it, not with a text message, not with a decision, not with anything visible from her side of the distance, just turns, internally, the way a thing that has been facing away turns toward warmth without being told to. That turning is the beginning of everything that comes next. Now would be a good moment to mention the tool that was built specifically for this season of the journey. Because what you are in now is a season of tracking, of witnessing your own movement, of not losing the moments that feel invisible but are not. The Twin Flame Journey Tracker and Progress Workbook was designed for exactly this. Not to explain what the journey is, but to document that it is actually moving. 39 pages with an 8-stage tracker so you know exactly where you are, month by month. A synchronicity log, so the 11:11 moments and the quiet signs do not disappear into the noise of daily life before you can anchor them. A daily self-love checklist that keeps you the center of the story, not the waiting. Weekly reflections for the patterns you would miss in the day-to-day. Monthly reviews where you can see your transformation in black and white instead of wondering if it is real. The link is below. If you have been doing the work and not tracking whether the work is working, this is the missing piece. The worst thing she can do right now is immediately turn this opening into a project. That is the reflex. That is the mind's automatic response to something it does not entirely understand. Something moved, something opened, and the practiced part of her wants to understand it immediately. Document it, place it in the correct framework, decide what it means and what to do next, not this time. Peter Levine uses a concept called titration in somatic work. Titration means processing in small doses. It comes from chemistry, from the practice of adding one solution to another gradually, monitoring the reaction at each stage. In nervous system terms, titration means not forcing everything open at once just because something cracked. Not deciding that because the felt sense arrived once, you must now pursue it aggressively through intensified practice or deeper excavation. The body completes at its own pace, and it needs to trust that the environment is safe enough for completion before it will risk more of it. What she can do is create the conditions for the felt sense to arrive again, not by forcing, by permission. This is a different quality of action entirely. Permission means pausing in the moments when something unexpected moves through and not immediately reaching for the journal or the voice note or the framework. Just staying with it, keeping her feet on the floor, breathing without directing the breath toward any particular outcome, noticing the sensation without immediately naming it. If it brings tears, letting them come without requiring them to have a story attached. The body does not always cry because it has understood something. Sometimes it cries because an incomplete experience is completing. The understanding may come later, or it may never arrive as a clean insight, and either way is sufficient. If it brings warmth or pressure, or that particular sensation that moves through and cannot be categorized as any named emotion, just let it move. Stay with it. Give it the room it is asking for. And when it passes, when it settles into that specific quality of stillness that is different from practice stillness, heavier and warmer and more animal than the spiritual stillness of a completed meditation, rest in it. Do not immediately analyze. Do not immediately reach for meaning. Let it have landed. That is the entire practice right now. The moon in Cancer amplifies exactly this capacity today. The ability to stay in the body, to let the felt sense be felt, to trust the sensation as information rather than immediately translating it into something more manageable. Cancer does not explain. Cancer sits in the kitchen at midnight with the feeling and does not try to make it into something it is not. That is what she is being asked to do right now. Not to understand more, to feel more. And here is the part that is both simple and genuinely difficult to hold. The feeling does not have to be about him. That is the trap she will want to walk into. The moment she drops the performance and makes contact with the felt sense, the mind will want to immediately redirect that aliveness toward the connection, will want to feel it as evidence of something happening between them, will want to turn it into information about where they are in the journey rather than simply experiencing it as what it is. What it is hers. The aliveness in her body this week is not evidence of the connection. It is not a sign about him or about timing or about what the universe is orchestrating between them. It is her own felt sense, her own body completing its own process. The connection is downstream of her. This is perhaps the hardest thing the twin flame journey asks the divine feminine to understand, not intellectually but in her actual lived experience. That her wholeness is not contingent on the outcome of the connection. That the felt sense arriving in her body is not an arrow pointing toward him, it is an arrow pointing toward herself. The moment she makes it about him, she has stepped back into the performance. A different performance, one with higher vibration language, but a performance nonetheless. Using her own genuine aliveness as currency in the economy of trying to get the connection to move. The felt sense is not currency, it is the arrival of herself. And the invitation of this particular week, with the moon in Cancer and Venus moving toward Uranus, is to let the arrival be complete in itself, to not immediately press it into the service of something else, to not turn the living experience of her own presence into a strategy for his return, to simply be the woman who felt something real, and to let that be enough, not as a spiritual stance, not as a surrendered posture designed to produce the correct energetic conditions for union, as a genuine resting in the fact of herself. That resting is the whole destination, and she arrived there briefly this week, without trying, without strategy, without performing diversion of herself that arrives. She just arrived. Here is what is true about the woman who has allowed the felt sense to arrive, who has let the real thing in without immediately managing it back into performance. She is not more spiritually advanced than she was before. She is not further along in any framework's version of progress. She does not have better answers or more elegant spiritual language for her experience. She is more real. And real, in the specific territory of the twin flame journey, carries a quality that advanced and healed and high vibration do not. Real means she is in genuine contact with herself. Real means the signal she is sending into the field is actually hers, not the curated version, not the carefully maintained image of the woman who has done her work. Real means she is home, in her own body. And a person who is home in their own body is magnetically different from a person who is managing their experience from a slight distance above it. Not louder, not more dramatic, not more spiritually intense, just more present. And in the field of a twin flame connection, where the resonance between two people operates at the level beneath the performance, beneath the spiritual correct answers, beneath the stage identification and the framework and the carefully maintained vibration, presence is the most powerful frequency there is. Not because she is doing it to affect him, but because she is doing it for herself. And the effect on him is the consequence of that, not the goal. This is the part of the journey that almost no one talks about clearly enough. The shift does not happen because she finally figures out the right spiritual stance or reaches the correct vibration or completes the correct amount of inner work. The shift happens when she stops trying to become the right version of herself and starts actually being herself. The specific, flawed, alive, sometimes completely undone, genuinely present self that exists underneath all the work. That self is not the project. That self is the destination. And this week, without planning it, without a framework for it, in the middle of an ordinary moment doing something she has done dozens of times before, she arrives there for 1 second. That second counts. It counts more than she knows. More than the month of correct practice that preceded it. The universe is not waiting for her to be more healed. It is waiting for her to be more real. She just was. And on his side of the distance, something turned. Not dramatically. Not with a message or a gesture or anything she can see from where she is standing, but in his body, in the part of his system that is calibrated to her below the level of thought or decision. Something registered the change in her field and turned toward it, the way a plant turns toward light, without deciding to, without understanding why, just turning, which is how every real thing begins, not with a decision, not with a grand gesture, not with a perfectly timed astrological transit, with a turning. She felt the real thing this week, and it felt her back. That is enough. It is more than enough. It is the whole thing, arriving not at the end of the journey, not at union, not at some future moment when everything has resolved, but right here, right now, in the middle of an ordinary week, in the middle of a healing practice she has done 100 times before, and the one moment she let herself be real. That moment is where the journey actually lives, not in the project, in the moment. Right there, she found it.